As Air Force One touches down in Tokyo, cameras rush to capture the moment. President Donald Trump steps out, smiling and waving, ready for what's being called an important diplomatic trip, a mission to strengthen economic ties across Asia under his new Pacific Prosperity Plan. The headlines are filled with talk of trade deals, tariffs, and power politics. But just before Trump left Washington, another story caught national attention. He publicly rejected the idea of running for vice president in the 2028 election. Some of his supporters had suggested a creative loophole, having another Republican run for president, name Trump as their running mate, then step down once elected, putting Trump back in the Oval Office for a third term. Trump dismissed the idea completely, saying the Constitution was clear and calling the plan too cute. He added that the Republican Party would have plenty of strong candidates for 2028, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance. But while all of that political chatter grabbed headlines, something much bigger and quieter was unfolding in the background. Canada, America's closest ally and trading partner, has begun moving away from its deep reliance on the U.S. dollar. It's not making front-page news, but experts say the change could reshape North America's economic future. For decades, the U.S. and Canada shared one of the most tightly connected economies in the world. Now, that bond is beginning to loosen, and surprisingly, it all started with a television ad and a burst of presidential anger. While speaking to reporters on Air Force One, Trump said he had no plans to restart trade talks with Canada anytime soon. The reason wasn't a failed deal or a major diplomatic dispute. It was a political ad from Ontario criticizing his tariffs. The ad used a clip of former President Ronald Reagan speaking out against trade barriers, a move that seemed to hit a nerve. In response, Trump announced a 10% tariff increase on Canadian imports, on top of the existing trade restrictions already in place. When asked for details about when the new tariffs would begin, Trump simply said, "We'll see." At that point, Canada was already facing a base U.S. tariff rate of around 35%. Though most goods were exempt under the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement, key industries like steel and aluminum were already hit hard with 50% tariffs, while the auto sector had partial protection from a 25% tariff on foreign cars. The message from Washington was clear: more economic pressure was coming. But while the media focused on Trump's reaction, Canada was making quiet but powerful moves of its own. Behind the scenes, policymakers in Ottawa were working on something that could reshape how money itself moves and what kind of money it is. The Canadian government has been fast-tracking plans to regulate stablecoins, digital assets tied to the Canadian dollar that could operate outside of U.S.-controlled financial systems. On the surface, it sounds like a technical update, but in global terms, it's part of a gradual effort to depend less on the U.S. dollar, a process some experts call de-dollarization. Sources close to Canada's Ministry of Finance say major updates on these new digital currency rules will likely appear in the country's upcoming budget announcement. If so, it would mark one of the biggest shifts in Canada's modern financial policy, a move toward greater independence in how it manages its currency, its trade, and ultimately, its future. For months, Canada's central bank, provincial regulators, and private financial innovators have been holding quiet but serious discussions. Why? Because Canada is preparing to regulate stablecoins, and that could have huge consequences for global finance. Unlike cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin that swing wildly in value, stablecoins are tied, or pegged, to real-world currencies such as the U.S. dollar. They act as a bridge between digital finance and traditional money. Today, more than 99% of the world's stablecoins are linked to the U.S. dollar. That means every time someone uses a popular coin like Tether, USDT, or Circle's USDC, they're indirectly strengthening America's financial power. These digital coins are mostly backed by U.S. Treasury bills, creating constant demand for U.S. government debt. In simple terms, the digital currency system has become a modern extension of the U.S. dollar's global dominance, almost like a digital petrodollar. Canada's plan to build and regulate its own homegrown stablecoin system could start to change that balance. To understand why it matters, Let's look at how stablecoins actually work. They're digital tokens that are designed to keep a steady value, usually equal to $1. The companies that issue them say each token is backed by assets like cash, bonds, or other financial reserves. When someone buys a stablecoin pegged to the US dollar, that dollar often gets invested in US government securities. With billions of these transactions happening worldwide, stablecoins have become a new way to fund US debt. Now imagine what happens if that flow of money starts shifting toward Canada. If Canadian companies issue stablecoins backed by the Canadian dollar instead, their reserves would be held in Canadian government bonds, not American ones. That would keep more money circulating within Canada's own economy and give it more control over its financial policies. It would also reduce the country's exposure to unpredictable U.S. monetary decisions, especially under Trump's America First approach. Ron Morrow, an executive director at the Bank of Canada, has said the country needs to carefully consider a national framework for stablecoins, something other nations are already developing. Canada's top banking regulator has also warned that the country risks falling behind while the US, Singapore, and Europe move ahead. For years, the Bank of Canada hesitated to create a central bank digital currency, leaving a gap that the US filled with its dollar-backed crypto coins. Now, Canada seems ready to close that gap, not with a government-issued digital loonie, but with privately issued, well-regulated stablecoins backed by its own currency. Meanwhile, the U.S. has already taken major steps. Earlier this year, Washington passed the Genius Act, a landmark law that officially brought stablecoins under federal financial regulation. The new rules require issuers to hold high-quality reserves, submit to independent audits, and follow anti-money laundering standards. The law was celebrated as a big step in making stablecoins part of America's official financial system. But it also had an important side effect. It turned every dollar-pegged stablecoin into a tool of U.S. monetary policy. Because these coins must be backed by U.S. Treasury bills, their global use boosts demand for American government debt. In other words, the more these coins spread around the world, the more foreign money flows back into U.S. assets, quietly strengthening the dollar's dominance. Some Canadian analysts warn that this gives Washington enormous influence and even visibility over global financial flows. Every investor in Canada, Europe, or Asia who uses a US-based stablecoin is, in effect, helping to fund US debt and support its economy. As Canadian investor John Ruffalo put it, every Canadian who uses a US stablecoin helps finance American debt, enriches US institutions, and sends our financial data south. For Canada's leaders, that's not just an economic issue. It's a question of national financial independence. Ironically, Donald Trump finds himself right at the center of both sides of this story. On one hand, he's raised tariffs and scolded allies like Canada. On the other, he's been calling himself the pro-crypto president. Earlier this year, Trump's family company, World Liberty Financial, even launched its own stablecoin called $1, a digital token backed by the US dollar and available on several blockchains. In May, reports surfaced that an Abu Dhabi-backed investment firm used $1